Hello and welcome to the December RIV call. Today's presenters are Elizabeth Caswell, Vice Chair of the Research Committee, Karen Shishino Jordan, Chair of the Research Committee, Danny Kovarik, Director of Research Strategy, and Rachel Webb, Senior Director of Research Operations. We're going to get started with JDRF Research Strategy and Governance with Elizabeth Caswell and Karen Shishino Jordan.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Caswell, and I'm like many of you on this call. I have 3 loved ones with type 1 diabetes, my husband and 2 of our 3 sons, and it is my privilege and honor to serve on the JDRF Research Committee and on the JDRF IBOD.
Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Jordan, and my connection to T1D is my daughter, Allie. She was diagnosed when she was 13, and that was 14 years ago. And I wear a few hats for JDRF. I am, as you know, chair of the research committee. I also serve on the international board. I am a board member of the T1D fund, and I am vice chair of the funding committee. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about the research committee. I always talk about when I first started volunteering for JDRF. I was out raising money, and I knew that it was going to fund really important research, but I wasn't quite sure how that happened. And so we're going to kind of give you a peek inside the black box today, and hopefully you can share that with our community. So just to give a little bit of background, the research committee is made up of all lay volunteers. There are 8 of us currently, and we all have a connection to type 1. Basically, our role is to make sure that the type 1 community is represented as the research scientists for JDRF considered the different grants that they will be making. So on the next slide, Brian, please. And please go ahead, Elizabeth.
So the JDRF research strategy is a little bit different, but very connected to the JDRF mission, which all of you are very familiar with. It prioritizes accelerating therapies to cure, prevent T1D and its complications. But we can't be all things to all people at JDRF. We just simply do not have that kind of resources. So we are very thoughtful about how we deploy the resources that you guys in the community go out and raise on behalf of JDRF. And we are always trying to assess where can we fill gaps, where can we overcome barriers that are going to allow research to advance that much more quickly to help improve the lives of people living with T1D. So you can see the tie in our strategy to the mission, and then the research committee plays a large role in helping affirm the strategy that our staff partners work on developing.
So speaking of the research strategy, this is the document that guides the work that our research scientists do. And this strategy is an important piece of the research committee role. So the strategy basically is developed by the scientists with significant input from the key opinion leaders from literally around the world. And this strategy really kind of outlines the pathways for the priority areas that the research is focused on, and also lays out the gaps and the barriers that need to be addressed in getting us through that pathway that's articulated in the strategy. So the strategy is developed by the scientists. That then goes to the research committee. The research committee gives input and then ultimately approves the strategy. The strategy is widely available. It's published on the JDRF website, so anybody can go and see what the priorities areas are for JDRF. And then that document guides the grants that are solicited and ultimately pulled together by the scientists which then a portion of which go back to the research committee to approve. So the strategy, once it's developed and approved, is a guiding document, and then we subsequently have developed impact metrics that we use to evaluate that strategy and make any changes in response to what the science has shown us. And Elizabeth will talk about that in more detail in a bit.
One other thing that I want to say that we should all be really proud of is that JDRF is among the only healthcare related philanthropy organizations that does share its detailed strategy with our community. We do share it in both a lay and a scientific version so that it is accessible to our entire community. I think that really is a remarkable thing in that it gives us accountability to our community, and it allows the community to really see how their hard-earned funds, the work that you do is really deployed in a very thoughtful way.
So Elizabeth and I are going to tag team on this slide a little bit. This just gives you more insight into how the strategy and the grant making are connected. So as we talked about, the strategy outlines the priority areas and the pathways. And so one of the roles of the research committee is to make sure that the grants that are made address those priority areas and gaps that are outlined in that strategy document. So that's our kind of our guiding star. The research proposals that the research team solicit and review, this is actually a conversation with the scientists. It's not just they submit an application and it's yes or no. Our research team is very expert and probably have the deepest scientific knowledge of type 1 diabetes in the world in terms of the landscape view of everything that's going on. So they will review these grants. They will work with the PIs to develop a grant that is really specific and addresses those priority areas. And then they also are peer reviewed by external experts. So there's a lot of oversight and advice that goes into developing these grants. These research grants then go to the research committee if they are for $1 million or over. If they're under $1 million, the research scientists at JDRF have the authority to approve those grants internally. So those grants that are $1 million or over come to us on the research committee, and we approve them if, or at least give input, but in most cases approve them after they've gone through this very rigorous review process. And again, we always make sure that these grants conform to the strategy, even the ones that have been authorized by the JDRF research team. So the next step, I will turn over to Elizabeth.
So our team of scientists tells us, and we agree, that most of the work is done after a grant is approved. And that's when the scientific staff is working with the grantees to ensure that their research is making progress. All of our grants have very specific, well-documented milestones or steps in which they have to accomplish certain things so that we will continue to fund them. So we're constantly monitoring whether progress is being made. Sometimes progress comes in the form of, a hypothesis that fails, but we can still really learn from that. Sometimes progress is, achieving recruitment goals for a clinical trial. And our staff works really hard to ensure that everything keeps moving forward. Sometimes they have to jump in and say, how are we going to reshape this proposal to allow you to advance? And it's a real partnership, as Karen was saying, in the development of the grant. The execution of the grant is a partnership too. When a set of research is completed, JDRF staff is evaluating whether there might be an opportunity to continue funding. Sometimes a project will move along the scientific spectrum and progress and be worthy of additional funding. Sometimes we pivot based on our strategy and our impact metrics. So it's kind of a virtuous cycle in which we're constantly evaluating the success or the challenges that are faced and whether we should reinvest or move on to a different area of research. So I mentioned impact metrics, and your research committee on the next slide, Brian. Thanks. Work together with the scientific staff to evaluate or to develop a way of evaluating how our research strategy is performing. And you might think, oh, well, we know it's performing if people's lives are changed. That's our mission, is to improve people's lives and change the course of their disease. But that is something that's really kind of outside the control of our research strategy. What we can control with our research strategy is whether we identified gaps that we overcame, whether we moved a project or an area of science to the next stage of development. We can also kind of assess, what did we learn? Did we inspire the field to contribute additional resources? Our partners at Helmsley Charitable Trust sometimes come in after we fund a grant, and they'll add additional funding, or some funding might come in from something like NIH or something like that. So did we incentivize additional investments? Maybe a company was formed and the T1D fund decided to invest. So what we're doing is applying a set of metrics to the strategy itself to determine whether our strategy is effective. And then on a cyclical basis, we're reviewing each of our program areas in cures and improving lives to ensure that the science is moving forward and that the strategy is advancing things. And maybe it's not, or maybe there was a gap or a hole that we missed. And then every few years, we're taking the strategy as a whole and we're refreshing it to make sure that it is current and informed by our impact metrics to advance the science as best as possible, so that ultimately it can improve the lives of the people we love and care about.
So we just appreciate you taking the time to learn a little bit more about the research committee and the research grants process. As always, you can reach out to either one of us if you have questions or if you would like to learn more.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Webb, and I'm the Senior Director of Research Operations at JDRF. Today, I'm going to talk about JDRF's research grants, infrastructure, and operations. So this presentation is about how JDRF funds great research. I'm going to provide a high-level overview of our current portfolio, our strategic priorities, different grant opportunities that we have available, the grant's life cycle from proposal to closeout, and the financial impact that JDRF is able to make towards global T1D research. So the research committee, which Karen and Elizabeth lead, is a subset of JDRF's board of directors. One of their roles is to consider the funding allocations that are committed across our budget towards program priority areas, according to JDRF's research strategy. So these are the priorities and targets that we're considering when we're building our budgets and funding grants throughout the year. And since JDRF prioritizes cures research, at least 70% of new research funding is allocated towards cures. This slide shows these priorities in a little bit more detail. So again, we see that the main focus is cures research, which includes its own focus areas of screening, disease-modifying therapy, and cell therapy. About a quarter of funds are allocated towards improving lives research, which focuses on treatments that can help people with type 1 where they are today more immediately as we're looking for a cure. About 8 to 10% of funding is allocated towards training new PIs to work in type 1 research. So we keep the talent pipeline entering the T1D research field. And also we try to incorporate psychosocial aspects into our research projects to recognize that that is an important part of living with type 1 or participating in a clinical trial. On this slide, we see the reach globally of the current research grants portfolio, which includes over 300 individual active grants for approximately $300 million in active grant commitments across 22 countries globally. I wanted to point out this URL at the bottom, where you are able to go in and search according to whatever parameters would be helpful to you. So PI name, country, institution, and pull up all the grants that JDRF has awarded in those areas. So this also includes both active commitments and completed grants. And not only can JDRF really operate anywhere in the world, we have this global reach, we also are able to fund widely differing grantees. So we're funding academic institutions, companies small and large. We're partnering with other organizations all the time, including other funders, government agencies, particularly the Canadian government, the Australian government, the European Commission, and others. And this diversity of grantees and partners really helps us do everything we can to achieve our goal, JDRF's mission of improving lives today and tomorrow by accelerating life-changing breakthroughs to cure, prevent, and treat T1D and its complications. This is a snapshot of some of the featured grant opportunities that PIs are able to apply for. On the left here, you see that we release special RFAs over the course of every year, and these are targeted to particular topics. These two are currently open now, and we release different ones throughout the year. And as I said before, training is a significant priority for JDRF, and we offer the different types of training awards shown here. JDRF has funded hundreds of trainees over the past decades alone, and many have stayed in the field and received additional funding from JDRF. And a great example of this actually is Kevin Harold, who received a Career Development Award in 1988, and then went on to receive numerous JDRF grants. And he was the lead on the clinical trial for teplizumab Tzield. So we've been seeing really terrific impact from the people in our training program, and as they move forward through their careers and receive additional funding from JDRF. And looking at some of these other standard grants that we offer throughout the year, about 60% of our funding is through these strategic research agreements, which are our main kind of all-purpose research awards. We also are funding industry grants and these innovative awards, which are kind of smaller, time-limited grants where people pitch us something novel, something interesting that they want to study. And we see sometimes that these actually turn into more robust funding as they move forward. So things that have promising research results will go on to fund them with a strategic research agreement or other kind of award to continue looking into that work. We also fund conferences to convene scientists throughout the year as well on research topics. And as I mentioned, JDRF routinely partners with other funders, companies, government agencies to maximize our impact. And this can be through co-funding, where another organization will channel funds through JDRF to be given to a particular grantee, and through leverage, where JDRF will fund a grantee alongside another funder or organization. Leverage also includes the instances of industry grants, where companies are bringing substantial resources to the table of their own to make sure that the project is fully funded and very strong. This graph is from the last released annual report from FY21. And we see that in FY21, JDRF's advocacy and direct funding initiatives attracted over $400 million of additional funding to T1D research. So it's great to be able to quantify that and really show the reach and impact that JDRF's efforts are making for people with type 1. Thank you for all you do to help JDRF advance T1D research. And I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Danny Kovarik, to talk about JDRF's DEI and B initiatives.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. I'm Danny Kovarik. I'm the Director of Research Strategy, and I'm here to talk to you about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and specifically what we're doing in research to address this. As you may know, as an organization, JDRF took a stance on DEIB, specifically that T1D doesn't discriminate. And so we wanted to make sure that as an organization, we were dedicated to improving diversity and inclusion, both externally and internally as an organization. Within research, we wanted to be very intentional and strategic about how we apply the DEI principles into our mission. And so a small working group within our team basically set out to identify where our priorities should be and how it aligns with our existing research strategy. In that, we identified 3 priorities based on both the literature and speaking to experts in the field, as well as other organizations. And they're listed out here right there. The first is around diversity in academia. And I'll go into these in more detail in the coming slides. The second is around clinical trial recruitment, and the third is around health equity. And I want to be incredibly clear that while we're assigning these 3 priorities here and having a specific strategy that was moving forward going to be our guiding post for DEIB, JDRF Research was always funding for these priorities and making sure that it was always inclusive within our grant making. So while we were going to fund new initiatives, there was already a number of existing initiatives that fit into these categories that we were funding. So the first priority that I mentioned is diversity in academia. And really the problem here is that we know from data that there's a loss of diverse representation that exists within academia. And particularly we see this from early career trajectories. And we know that in the long run, that thwarts innovation and really, at the end of the day, slows down our mission towards curing type 1 diabetes. So for our intervention, we wanted to work with other organizations and identify where JDRF could play a specific role. And we talked specifically with the NIH, who is a partner in helping us define what our strategy here could be. And what we wanted to do was launch a new funding opportunity that targeted funding for early career investigators who identified as from an underrepresented group in STEM. So what does that look like? Last year, we launched the Diversifying Diabetes Research Talent in Academia, RFA. And this addressed a major gap that we saw for talent in type 1 diabetes. And specifically first, and you'll see this on the graph on the right, but there's an insufficient diversity of researchers, especially as you climb the career ladder in academia. So if you look at the graph, the blue is for assistant level positions, red is for associate, and then green is for full. So you can see as the colors go to the right, you're getting higher up in the academia rank. And if you look at how that plays out for race, you'll notice that for white researchers, there's an increased representation as you move up the academic ladder, and the opposite is true when you look at other ethnicities. What we also know is that only 2% of NIH R01, which is their main grant mechanism, were awarded to Black researchers in 2018. That statistic alone is glaring and something that we should be working on to fix. So we knew that there's this problem with diversity, and then what we also found is that the research funding was one of the main gaps for career progression up the academic ladder. So what we intended to do was provide grant funding for early career academic faculty from underrepresented groups, specifically providing them $400,000 over 2 years. And these people that were applying had to self-identify as members. We cross-checked essentially with the NIH's standards for what considered underrepresented groups in STEM academia. And with that, those grants that they had to apply for had to fit within JDRF's research mission and the strategy that we have on our website for the entire research strategy. From the first round, we were really excited to fund 5 investigators. So what's really exciting about this is that the proposals that came in were better than we could have even hoped for. In fact, one of these proposals from Judith Simcox was so exciting that the team actually, I think, over doubled her project award because we wanted to increase the scope of her work because of the unique opportunity that she had with specifically samples looking at cardiovascular risk. So I won't spend time on each one of the individual projects, but these are all available on our website if you want to dig into them more. But what I really want to call out is that there were so many dimensions of diversities within this group. There were multiple women, multiple first-generation Americans, Black, Latina, and immigrants from Central America and Africa. So we really accomplished our goal in being able to pull out a cohort of people early in their faculty career that self-identified in representations of underrepresented groups in academia. And they brought some really exciting projects that the team is energized by. In what we've done in this year is we've actually relaunched this opportunity. We increased the scope of the project, so the amount is higher than in this next iteration. And we've most recently just received LOIs from this. So we'll be funding at the end of this fiscal year or at the beginning of the next fiscal year. The next area I want to talk about is clinical trial recruitment. So clinical trials have disproportionately, but unintentionally, hopefully, excluded diversity and inclusion in criteria, resulting in therapies developed that not often benefit all people with type 1 diabetes equally or optimally. So what we wanted to do was be very intentional about our processes within the organization. We have a really robust clinical trial review process. And what we wanted to do was make sure that that fit diversity and inclusion goals. So what we've done is we've evaluated how we plan clinical trials and the information that we work with the investigators on, specifically about recruitment plans. So our reporting practices have completely shifted so that they now call out specifically what the investigators' plans for recruiting diverse subjects, and then how we might track against that to make sure that they're following through on that. And so our goal here is to really have more diverse clinical trials. And I'll show you an example of what that looks like in practice. So recently we funded a project within our psychosocial portfolio. And in this, we're hoping to use telemedicine to reduce diabetes distress. So overall, we know mental health issues are linked to poor glycemic control and lower quality of life. And diabetes distress is basically when a person feels frustrated, defeated, or overwhelmed by diabetes. And that's a problem in itself, but even more so, if it's left undetected and untreated, this can transition to depression. And both distress and depression are linked to risk of anxiety, poor diabetes self-management, higher glycemic levels, and poor overall outcomes. We know that around 20 to 40% of young adults experience diabetes distress, with a higher percentage in underserved populations. So this project proposes to use telemedicine delivered cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a well-accepted practice within mental health counseling, with enhanced CGM monitoring to target diabetes distress in young adults with T1D. The project will study to determine if this intervention that targets diabetes distress and self-management yields both clinically significant improvements in both diabetes distress and glycemic control relative to the control group receiving CGM alone with no CBT therapy. What's so important about this for DE&I is that from the beginning, we set a hard target of that at least 20% of the participants would be from racial and ethnic minorities. And while that's also important in our bigger goals of making sure that these clinical trials are more representative of the population, but as I mentioned before, that there's a higher percentage of diabetes distress in these underserved populations. So lastly, and definitely not least, is what we're doing around health equity. And we know really well that underserved communities, whether that's ethnicity, location, or otherwise, have the poorest outcomes from T1D. So JDRF's goal is to bridge the health inequity and care disparities in underserved communities and really dig into the root cause analysis of the divide and develop targeted initiative to surmount those barriers. And we're leading a number of efforts to be very intentional about what we do in health equity. I'm going to talk about one of the projects that you've probably heard about, but we're working on building out a portfolio here, leveraging our existing partnerships with organizations that are really strong in this area of health equity. So the first that I'll mention here is this Avera eCare School Health T1D demonstration project. And this is incredibly important. This is a partnership that we partnered with Helmsley Charitable Trust with, and the organization Avera eCare to address disparities in access to school healthcare. Only 39% of the schools in the US employ a full-time school nurse, and just 35% employ a part-time school nurse. In some rural areas, the coverage rate is even lower. And so what we did is we partnered with eCare School Health, and they'll provide school nurses via a live audio visual technology. So we're able to reach some of those more remote school environments and make sure that they also have access to this healthcare service in the schools. And school nurses, I mean, anyone can know, are critical in providing care for children. And we want to make sure that especially for people with T1D. So this study will do is that we'll enroll approximately 100 schools and invite families of students with basically that are aged 3 to 17 with type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes to enroll in this study. And what we're going to look and evaluate is how this may improve their clinical outcomes. So looking at both physiological, social, emotional, cognitive, and even their school performance. And we're also going to be evaluating how this program is in terms of cost effectiveness with any implementation. So again, what we're hoping to do here is address the health inequities related to access to a school nurse and how that might improve both their T1D, but their overall well-being and school performance. So thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. Again, we have our 3 priorities, both in improving the talent in academia, the way that we run clinical trials, and hoping to address health equity. And there's so much more to come here, and I am delighted to be able to present this to you today.